Hello and welcome back to the Premier Injuries podcast. We've got a slightly different show for you, a new format that we're kind of doing, marrying up all the data that we have here at Premier Injuries. We're almost showing off our guns in terms of the excellent work that we do behind the scenes, because this is the stuff that Ben and I usually do week to week in terms of player and injury analysis, but we don't usually publish it because we don't have the time in terms of it. But we found a bit of time this weekend to kind of give insight, so make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and also subscribe. If you like this sort of stuff, it'll be really helpful to know, and we'll try and fit this more into our schedule. But today we're talking about what is going wrong at Leeds. And like I said, we're kind of marrying up Ben's expertise with injury data, returns to performance and things like that, and also looking at their underlying data, maybe reasons why. So we've got a few talking points, but Ben, so far this season, Leeds have really kind of seen a downturn. Starting off with last season, 2021 season, they didn't have the most amazing of starts, but they had 3 wins, 2 draws and 4 losses under their belt at this time. But they also had 14 goals scored and 17 conceded. They were arguably one of the most exciting teams in the league. This season, 1 win, 4 draws, 4 losses, only 8 goals scored and 16 conceded. There's been a real marked, drop off in their performances, hasn't there?
It begs the question, are people looking at Leeds and their assets from 2020 to 2021 season, when they did shine and they did perform and they were returning well? And are they just forgetting about this downturn in performance this season? And the reality, particularly when we're talking about somebody maybe like Patrick Bamford, who had that significant price increase in FPL in terms of his price on from last season to this, are these assets now worth it? And should we even be worried or bothered about, whether they're going to return soon? Because, there are other options out there, other options which are well placed, who are producing the numbers, who have their underlying data, that we should be targeting instead of these, and not worrying about when they're coming back from injury, because they shouldn't really be on our radar.
And I mean, I made that decision this week. I got a bit of egg on my face because I made the transfer out of Rafinha, kind of based on what we've worked about here behind the scenes. It didn't work out too well, but the thing is, football is more long-termism in my idea, and I think it's going to take him a bit of time to recover. In terms of it then, just kind of going through it, there's a few reasons that we think that this could have happened. So first and foremost, I wanted to start basically with last season. 38 game data, as you said, really, really good stuff. Then you look at the last 9 games of last season, and Leeds almost stepped it up a notch even further. More big chances created, more goals scored, a higher XG per game during that time. And they were really efficient as well, because they were doing that actually with less shots inside the box, less on target. So that there was like a slight downturn in terms of like chances created, but they went up to an even higher level of goal conversion, but also defending as well. Now, some people might say that, they kept focus, whereas others put the foot off the gas towards the end of the season. We've had a previous video in terms of people in their flip-flops, what happens towards the end of the season when teams have nothing to play for. But that suggested to me at the start of this season that Leeds would probably, kick on, that they'd have a good start and maybe be pushing up the league. They had a fairly, good start to the season in terms of the games. And that's why we're looking at it now, kind of going, well, they've had easier games during this easier game run, and they haven't done that well. But we have to start off the discussions with the fact that they did have a disrupted start to the season. Junior Firpo was injured. He was the signing to replace Alioski, who we will get onto next. But also they lost Llorente, and so they start the season for that Man United, huge loss without their first back line. So already, Ben, do you think that maybe injuries, almost ended the season before it started because they couldn't get their first 11 out, they couldn't train properly, they couldn't get that ideology into the players' brains that Bielsa really, really needs.
Yeah, I think what it does, it begs a couple of questions. First and foremost, you may be questioning the strength and depth of this Leeds United team. Do they have the cover, particularly, I know you've mentioned defensively, but also in an attacking sense as well? The loss of Patrick Bamford, who comes in, nobody naturally steps up to fill his boots. We've seen Rodrigo there that hasn't quite delivered to the same kind of level. So that's a massive loss. But then you also, and we've discussed this just before recording, generally, how many injuries have Leeds suffered? How many days have they lost? And how has that impacted? It's always important to contextualize this. And I'll give a prime example of Liverpool. Generally speaking, they didn't have a too bad an injury record last season overall in terms of the squad. However, when you look at where those injuries occurred and when they occurred, you had Van Dijk out, Joe Gomez out, Joe Matip out, you had Nat Phillips out at some point. And that's all well and good. Can you carry 5 or 6 first-class top defenders in your squad? No, you can't. So that's what you need to consider first time. And secondly, now, what you also need to consider, because we've seen this with Leeds, you mentioned Robin Koch, Diego Llorente, Luke Ayling. Luke Ayling has been the mainstay of that Leeds defence for so long now. I don't think I've watched Leeds consistently when Luke Ayling hasn't been in the side. So not only are you then losing those players, but you then look at the impact that it can have, this domino effect. And the biggest one for me is Stuart Dallas. Now, if you look at the underlying data and his outstanding performance metrics from last season, I think he was joint second top scorer team. You then pull in Dallas out of that Leeds United midfield on occasions, and he's having to drop into that back line. You mentioned Alioski. There's a reliance of having to play players like Junior Firpo, who was young, who was adapting to a new environment. He needs to understand the philosophies of a new team, particularly a Marcelo Bielsa team. And all of these little niggles and setbacks are having almost this perfect storm, which, reverberates throughout of the team. And that's why, there's one possible explanation why we're seeing this huge downturn from Leeds United's output.
And so just quickly on that data then, what you're kind of saying is maybe Leeds haven't been disproportionately affected in a huge amount of injuries. It's more, as you said, the context of the fact that it's the loss of the big stars, those important players. You wouldn't say that Leeds have had an incredibly large amount of injuries in comparison to others in the Premier League.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's probably slightly above average, and it's higher. Certainly it was higher than last season. But you're talking about key personnel within that team. And Patrick Bamford is testament to that. If you look at his performance data from last season, he was the one player, that one shining light, that one player who came up from the Championship that everybody questioned, that everybody said, look, we love Leeds, they play some great football, but they need a striker. Patrick Bamford came in and he blew everybody away. With his goals. He's now, on the fringes of that England squad, can't quite, so he's in and around that mix. You take him out of it, and like I say, you lose a focal point. It's not necessarily the goals that he may bring to that Leeds team, it's how he knits that Leeds United team together. It's his hold-up play, it's the runs, it's his unselfishness and his unwillingness to do those hard yards. And maybe where somebody like, say, Rodrigo, is just not able to come in and play that same style of football. In Luke Ayling, again, like I say, you've got this dependable, well, I was going to say right back, but in essence, he can play anywhere along that back line. Somebody who's been there, done it, a warrior, knows what it's all about. You're then relying on the likes of maybe Jamie Shackleton to make that step up. And yes, a great prospect, but still young, still developing. They're going to have mistakes in their game, and they're going to have that lack of consistency maybe until they learn to grow and understand and mature that a little bit.
And the interesting thing is kind of almost a chain reaction then, isn't it? There's extra pressure now on Raphinha because he is fit, that he has to almost take on that extra burden of goal scoring creation. The fact that maybe in other situations he might be rested with the type of injury that he does have, but because others in the team aren't fit, he almost has to continue playing. There's one final point before I want to get on to the kind of Alioski data deep dive. We're going to do a few deep dives here. There's a huge unknown now with Bamford. A lot of people are kind of saying, we have to get him back, or when is he back? I want to get him into my team. He's going to improve Leeds. But this is the first time he's actually had a big injury in his career, isn't it, Ben? So we're almost entering an unknown period now of Bamford where we don't know how quickly he will recover. There's obviously, we use different phrases. So there's return to play, but then there is the return to actual peak kind of sharpness, fitness, and kind of match sharpness in terms of that. So can you make an educated guess as to how quickly he will recover because he's had a good injury history, or is this literally just almost an unknown and a shoot for the stars?
I mean, very difficult to predict, and almost to take a step back from that, in which people, we hope. I mean, Patrick Bamford himself was confident of return to train during the last international break. So we have a return to train, but that necessarily doesn't mean a return to play. So we know with Marcelo Bielsa, he expects his player to be able to perform at a certain level, at a certain intensity. And we've seen with Calvin Phillips, who only spent, just under 3 weeks on the sideline, he wouldn't even throw him back in the squad. Now we know that Patrick Bamford's been sidelined now since game week 5. So that's an extended period. So even if we did see Bamford train this week ahead of game week 11, will he be in the matchday squad? I'll categorically state now it's a no. He may use that international break, to get those levels up. There'll be maybe a couple of bounce games behind that. Then there's a return to play, which could be integrated. And by that, what we mean is steady increase in minutes from the bench, and then a return to performance. But ordinarily, what I would suggest is you're probably looking at least 3, 4, 5, 6 games, even for some players, to get back to anywhere near their pre-injury levels of performance.
So let's move it to Alioski, because I think he was almost a weird character at Leeds and in the Premier League. He was sometimes maligned for his performances. But the first big thing that you have to say, which is so important to Bielsa, is he'd been with Bielsa from the start at Leeds. So he was well aware of the kind of nuances, tactics, and really brought up. So he knew the style. And this is almost maybe where and why Firpo hasn't come to that level just yet. He probably has the potential. We shall see. As you said, he's young, and Bielsa's so good at coaching people, but it takes time. This isn't something that happens overnight. So I did a bit of comparing of Alioski's data versus Firpo's, and again, first of all, Firpo has had a start-stop to his career in the Premier League. He's been injured, he's been in and out of the side, he's young, and it takes time to adapt, not just to Leeds, but also to the Premier League. That's what we always say. But the thing is, Alioski was so good, and he was almost the epitome of that Leeds system. So first of all, Alioski was a better presser, especially in the areas that Leeds like to press in. He was better in the kind of middle and final third tackles rather than the kind of deep defensive stuff. But also Alioski was better at playing balls into the penalty area, offered more crosses to somebody like Bamford, creating those differing chances, maybe not just the usual ones, and generally created a higher XA per 90. This could account for some of the drop-off in chances that we're going to look at with Leeds. And over the per 90 data, just generally, Alioski had a higher XGI. So, the phrase is that the team is only as strong as the weakest link. And I don't want to insult Firpo too much, but maybe he is almost that weakest link of the chain that has been weakened all the way along it. So that's probably one of the factors, that I think that you agree with, that Alioski has been more of a loss than maybe people accounted for with Leeds.
Yeah, massively. When I looked at some of the data myself, I was quite surprised at the impact in terms of the actual numbers when we looked at Alioski, and maybe we underestimated his actual contribution to the team. Now, a couple of standout numbers from last season that particularly in terms of when he actually played, he overperformed his expected clean sheets, was around about sort of seven to eight. Leeds had 10 when he started those games. But the biggest one for me was XG conceded. When he was involved, that was in and around 65 goals expected conceded. Actual goals, 35. So I mean, a huge drop off. And you talked about Firpo and how he's had a stop-start season, and other players, as we touch upon. One thing that is grossly underestimated, the impact is availability for players. And Alioski last season had 100% availability in the Premier League. And what that does, that gives you a stable foundation to build your team on week in and week out, with the likes of Luke Ayling, and with the likes of some of the other players in there. And once you've got that solid foundation and you get that right, then you can focus your efforts further up the field.
Just quickly, before we get into the team data as well, I found it quite interesting that Leeds almost seem to have maybe not yet worked on, or maybe they have, but it's not been successful as yet. They still haven't worked on set pieces. Second lowest XG from set pieces this season, already conceded 2, and they also have one of the worst XG conceded from set pieces. So in a situation like this where marginal gains might at least solidify some performances, there's a great quote from an Italian coach that set pieces are a 20 goal a season striker that never gets injured. That could be something that Leeds benefit from, especially in a time where they're struggling. But let's look at that last season data compared to this season, and it is quite worrying for reading. Looking at, it's obviously 9 game weeks compared to 38, but the team have gone from 1.63 goals per 90 to 0.89. That's almost halving it. They're shooting about the same. They're having less shots inside the box, and in terms of it, the big kicker as well is the fact that their XG per 90 is so much less. So some of that data, like I said, their chances created is about the same, but there seems to be a problem in creating good quality chances, and that's reflected in big chances created data in terms of that going from 1.58 per 90 to 0.67. So there's almost a reduction in the quality of the output. Some of it is not necessarily to do with the quantity, so some of those numbers haven't reduced too much. There's just something a little bit off, and maybe it brings us back to the earlier point that we said at the start of the season. They didn't start as they'd want to with players injured, but also the fact that their key stars have been injured. So players who might have been able to, go above XG or create these high quality opportunities just haven't been there in the squad. The thing is as well is, when teams get into this sort of situation, Ben, sometimes it's hard to break out of that loop. So Bamford could come back, Raphinha could come back, to full fitness. He is still in the side. Harrison, Firpo might improve output, but it might be too late by then. The damage might be done, because there's the psychological impact of what these poor runs have, but also there's the unknown of Leeds haven't been in this position before. Bamford hasn't been in this position before. It's not a surety that his return to fitness will mean straight improvement in output. So maybe the danger here is, the longer this goes on for, the less likely is that it will turn around, which people are assuming just as truth, as fact.
Yeah, I mean, for me as well, you may also need to consider, is there a little bit of second season syndrome in there? Leeds arrived, all guns blazing, and almost our teams now maybe understanding a little bit better how Leeds play. They're working on ways to counteract, their high pressing game, those high intensity plays. And look, the pressures are different. Again, you're coming up from that second tier in English football, and a little bit like Brentford this season, they've always been pretty on the eye. They've always been that team that you looked at in the Championship. Can they make that step up? Yes, they can. That level of expectation now it went from, oh, well, can they play, to actually we're expecting Leeds to not only, be pretty on the eye and produce some nice data and get some good results, but actually we're wanting them top half and could they even threaten into to the European places. And so that changes the dynamic, the external pressures. And then internally, you're thinking, well, actually, if you haven't got off on that right foot and the narrative is slightly different, how are those players handling that pressure? And we talked about, the likes of the Shackletons coming in, the Junior Firpos coming, these young players who are in and around Gerhardt, the other youngster who's coming in. You're thinking, well, are they going to be allowed or afforded that opportunity to maybe bed themselves in and understand? When you're in and around that relegation zone, you're in that dogfight, and we're recording in and around the Norwich game. If Norwich can get a result here, Norwich will go above Leeds in that league table. And I mean, not many, if anybody, would have predicted that at the start. And all of a sudden, it goes from a team who is on a little bit of a bad run to not playing very well to actually, are Leeds just not as good as we thought they were? And secondly, and I have raised concerns in the past, but you also, in my opinion, you also need to start questioning Marcelo Bielsa. Where is the plan B in this? You can't just always go gung-ho and always look to outrun Newcastle. The Newcastle game, was a prime example to me. We weren't in great form. We were under Steve Bruce then, and yet we could have easily came away with that 3 points. Factor in the injuries, you're almost putting, the square pegs in round holes. You want to play the same system. You expect everybody to play a system, but you don't have the personnel to be able to carry out your instructions to the level that you want. And maybe that's why we're seeing this huge downturn from Leeds.
And this is a really, really good point, is the kind of fact is maybe Bielsa's almost being forgiven. Maybe rightly so. I think he's earned, a little bit of respect and definitely time to be given the opportunity to turn things around. But the fact of the matter is that this is a team now in a relegation fight. Going from game weeks 1 to 8, looking at that, the team have relegation data. 3rd worst XG conceded, and then 4th worst XG in total. This is almost a totally different Leeds side that we saw last season. And this can be linked to individual players as well in terms of their downturn in output. So we've looked at the individual performances of Harrison, Raphinha and Bamford, because they were the standout ones last season. They're the ones with the huge price rises and also the huge interest in them as assets. And just kind of looking, again, Bamford, a little bit like what we said with Firpo, has had start and stop season. He's played from game weeks 1 to 5 and now hasn't been involved in the team. The big standout for me, he's got similar XG, so 0.47 this season versus 0.54 last season. That's obviously a bit of a drop off, but still fairly good. Still similar, in fact, slightly higher shots inside the box. But then you look at the conversion rate. He's gone from 15.9% last season to 6.7 this season. He's gone from 0.5 goals per 90 to 0.21. And it's quite worrying stuff. And this is also reflected in Leeds' kind of team data with him in. the team still weren't doing very good, but without him, the side are struggling a fair bit as well. And they've almost lost 0.25 of a goal per 90. They've lost that person who, for all his faults this season with his 6.7% goal conversion ratio, they now don't have that person who's central to their attack, to getting those chances into the back of the net. And like you said as well, it's not just his passing and his movement in terms of his high XG per 90 and some involvement in terms of the expected assists as well. It's his movement, it's his ability to create space for others and give a different style and opportunity for the team. And then this is almost gone into Raphinha and Harrison's data as well. Is kind of concerning stuff that Harrison has almost got nothing. Raphinha has kept some sort of level in terms of quality. In fact, he's almost stepped up a little bit, maybe because of the absence of others. But the loss of Jack Harrison's data is almost minimal in many instances. He's gone from a fair amount of chances created, a fair amount of XA per 90. It's now nothing at all, and it's quite worrying. So there's almost the fact that some of these players have been injured, but also some of these players just haven't been there even when they've been on the pitch, Ben. Does this link back to, the early start that we said that they lost quite a few people at the start of the season, that they've had a bit of interrupted pre-season with that? Or do you think that this could be other reasons as well?
I think it's not easy just to pin it down to one specific aspect. I think there are several influencing factors. For me, the one that really came as a huge surprise was the downturn in output from Jack Harrison, and he was a player that was singled out on Friday during Friday's press conference by Marcelo Bielsa. He talked about certain players not, hitting the dizzy heights of last season, that he knows that. So I wanted to look at Jack Harrison, particularly this season, and how he started, and then how maybe he's recovered from contracting COVID and whether we've seen some impact. And again, just to try and get some context, I looked and I was quite surprised. I knew Jack Harrison was on my radar last season for fantasy. I can't quite remember as to why. So I had a look at the numbers, and in terms of his goal involvement, he had more than Raphinha. Only Patrick Bamford scored more goals. Joint second highest assists with Raphinha. So in terms of the attack and outputs, it was superb. Now, we mentioned at the top of the show, the influence, or maybe that under appreciation of Alioski. Is this something which maybe Jack Harrison is suffering from game weeks? I think it was 1 to 4 before he ended up getting COVID. We've seen that, as you touched upon, there was literally nothing there coming from Jack Harrison, nothing at all, certainly nothing any noteworthy, nothing to write home about. And then since he's come back from COVID, those almost non-existent figures have plummeted even further. And he's ultimately just dropped off the radar. And we've seen that reflected in the minutes as well. Typically he would be one of the mainstay of that Leeds United team. A lot of minutes on the pitch. I think there was 2,000, just under 2,900 minutes I've seen. But we've seen since he's returned from COVID, there's been 2 45-minute performances there where, Bielsa has just said, well, he's just not seeing what he wants, and he's getting the hook. So I think that's been massive, and again, maybe something that hasn't been touched upon massively during this early part as to why Leeds are just not the team that we saw last season.
Yeah, a 66% reduction in his expected assist per 90. That there is a possibility that obviously there was a bit of an overperformance in terms of it, and he might not be up to that elite level like somebody like Mo Salah that can do that comfortably. But it's gone from wild overperformance to wild underperformance. Hopefully there can be a kind of going back to the mean in that he matches some of that data, but at the moment less so. As I said, Raphinha is probably the only one that can kind of hold his head up high, because he's almost matched a lot of his data from last season. He's still creating a lot. He's still doing quite a few assists. But the question is there, who's he doing it to? You know, the big reduction for him is maybe the quality of chances again. And like I said, that's through the team. Big chance created 0.46 per 90. Now it's down to 0.29. It could be the fact that Bamford isn't there for him to assist, though. You know, the player getting in those opportunities. But I think that's given a good insight into what we do, what we can do here at Premier Injuries for you. Like I said at the start of the video, do give it a like, do give it a comment if you've enjoyed this, and send more questions in. We can do more deep dives and analyses for you. This is what we do every day, our bread and butter, and we wanted to bring it to you to see if you enjoyed it as well, because we kind of write all this stuff and we thought, well, it'd be nice to bring it to the community for all of you to enjoy. Make sure to subscribe as well. We've got all our usual content coming up, high quality injury analysis, stats data for you, and this could be something added to our arsenal as well. But for now, I'm going to wish you the best of luck. I hope that your game weeks have been good. I hope you've enjoyed your weekends, whatever you've been doing, and we will be back again as usual through the week with all of our updates. But for now, a goodbye and a good luck.